Stop. Just stop for a moment. Take one breath and notice where you are right now. Because there is something you may have been making far more complicated than it ever needed to be. You have heard people talk about manifestation as if you need perfect thoughts, perfect energy, perfect rituals, perfect timing, as if one wrong thought could destroy everything you are trying to create. But what if the truth is almost the opposite? What if manifestation was never supposed to feel like a struggle? What if the reason you have been trying so hard is the very reason you keep feeling stuck? You may have written the goals. You may have repeated the affirmations. You may have imagined the future. You may have asked the universe for signs. And still, something feels missing. You see other people moving forward while you seem to be waiting. You watch opportunities appear for them. You wonder why your life has not changed yet. But listen carefully. Your life may not be ignoring you. You may simply be sending two different messages at the same time. One part of you says, I am ready. Another part quietly says, but what if it doesn't happen? One part says, I deserve more. Another asks, what if I lose what I already have? One part wants the new life, while another part is still protecting the old one. And that is where everything changes. Because manifestation is not just about what you say you want. It is about what you repeatedly expect, accept, and move toward. Think about an old radio. You can stand beside it for hours and shout the name of your favorite station, but shouting does not change the frequency. You have to tune it. And perhaps that is what you have been missing. Not more effort. Not another complicated method. Not another 100 affirmations. Alignment. There is a reason certain opportunities suddenly appear after you stop chasing them. There is a reason an old relationship can disappear right before a completely different chapter begins. There is a reason you sometimes feel restless before something important changes. It can feel like confusion. But sometimes confusion is simply the moment before your old pattern stops controlling your decisions. And you are entering that moment now. You are beginning to notice what no longer feels right. You are beginning to question the life you once accepted without thinking. You are beginning to recognize the difference between what you truly want and what you were simply taught to want. That realization is not failure. It is the threshold. Imagine standing in front of a massive golden door. Behind you is everything familiar. Old fears, old habits, old expectations, old versions of yourself. In front of you is something you cannot fully see yet. You reach for the handle, but your hand stops. Why? Because the unknown is asking you to trust something you cannot prove yet. And this is where most people turn back. They think the door is locked. But here's the truth. Sometimes the door is not locked. You are simply waiting for permission to open it. No one is coming to give you that permission. You have to decide. You have to become willing to move before you have complete certainty. Because the moment you stop demanding proof before taking the first step, something inside you begins to change. Your attention changes. Your choices change. Your reactions change. And slowly, the world you experience begins to look different because you are no longer meeting it as the same person. That is why the simplest form of manifestation can feel so difficult. The simple part is choosing. The difficult part is becoming someone who no longer argues with that choice every morning. And here is the line I want you to remember. Manifestation becomes powerful when you stop begging for the future and start becoming available for it. Read that again. You are not here to force reality. You are here to stop fighting the possibility of a different reality. Maybe that is why this message found you at this exact moment. Not because everything has magically changed already, but because you are finally becoming aware of what has been changing inside you. And once you understand that, you will see manifestation differently. Because the next question is not, how do I get what I want? The deeper question is, who am I becoming when I stop believing that what I want is impossible? And that question takes us somewhere much deeper. You may have spent years thinking the universe needed to be convinced. More affirmations, more visualization, more signs, more rituals, more waiting. But what if none of that was the real problem? What if the biggest block was not the world outside you, but the constant argument happening inside you? Because there is a strange moment that happens when you decide you are ready for something new. At first, you feel excited. You imagine the new life. You see yourself waking up with freedom. You imagine the opportunity, the relationship, the success, the peace. For a few minutes, it feels real. Then another thought appears. But what if it doesn't happen? And suddenly, the future you were building disappears behind an old fear. This happens because your mind does not only respond to what you want, it responds to what you repeatedly believe is safe. You can say, "I want change," while spending every day protecting yourself from change. You can say, "I want abundance," while constantly expecting loss. You can say, "I am ready for my next chapter," while secretly hoping nothing around you actually changes. And that conflict creates the feeling of being stuck. You are pulling toward one future while holding on to another. Imagine standing at a crossroads in the middle of a silent desert. One road leads toward everything you have known. The other disappears into a horizon you cannot see. There are no signs, no map, no voice telling you which road is guaranteed to work. You can stand there forever asking for certainty. Or you can choose. And that choice matters more than you realize. Because the moment you choose a direction, your attention begins looking for things it could not see before. A door you ignored suddenly looks important. A conversation you would normally avoid suddenly feels necessary. An opportunity appears where you once saw nothing. A person says something that changes the way you think. A decision that once terrified you suddenly feels obvious. Was the universe hiding these things from you? Maybe not. Maybe you were simply looking through an old filter. And this is where the word quantum becomes interesting as a metaphor. At the smallest level we can imagine, reality is far stranger than the solid world appears to be. But you do not need to understand complicated physics to understand the lesson here. Your attention changes what you notice. Your expectations influence what you attempt. Your beliefs influence what you tolerate. Your choices shape what happens next. And those choices create patterns. Patterns become habits. Habits become identity. And identity, quietly, becomes the life you recognize as normal. That is why changing your life can feel so uncomfortable. You are not only changing circumstances. You are challenging what your mind has learned to call normal. Think about someone who has spent years believing they are unlucky. When a good opportunity arrives, they may question it. When someone treats them well, they may distrust it. When success begins appearing, they may find a reason to pull away. Not because they do not want a better life, but because the better life feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel dangerous. So the mind reaches backward. It tries to return you to the version of life it understands. This is why your old patterns may become louder right before a major change. You suddenly feel doubt. You suddenly remember every past failure. You suddenly hear that inner voice saying, "Who do you think you are?" Listen. That voice does not always mean you are going the wrong way. Sometimes it appears because you are finally going somewhere different. And this is where you need to stop fighting yourself. You do not need to destroy every fearful thought. You do not need to become positive every second. You simply need to stop allowing one fearful thought to make every decision for you. Fear can speak, and you can still move. Doubt can appear, and you can still choose. The old identity can knock on the door, and you do not have to invite it inside. Because manifestation is not about becoming a person who never feels uncertainty. It is about becoming a person who no longer lets uncertainty decide everything. That is the shift. And once that shift begins, something unexpected happens. You stop waiting for a sign that you are ready. You begin acting like the person who is ready. You stop asking, "When will my life change?" And you start asking, "What would I do today if I already believed change was possible?" That question can completely alter the direction of your day. Maybe you send the message. Maybe you start the project. Maybe you leave the situation that has been draining you. Maybe you finally say no. Maybe you say yes. Maybe you take one tiny step that seems meaningless, only to discover later that it was the first step toward an entirely different life. Because sometimes the biggest shift does not arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet decision nobody else notices. And that is why the simplest manifestation principle is also the one most people overlook. Your reality does not need a louder wish. It needs a clearer decision. You have been asking for the future, but now the future is asking something from you. Not perfection, not certainty, a decision. And there is one final layer to this that most people never see. Because choosing a new direction is only the beginning. The real test comes when your old reality starts giving you reasons to turn back. And this is where most people misunderstand the entire process. They think the moment they make a decision, everything should change. They expect the message, the opportunity, the money, the perfect relationship, the sudden breakthrough. But sometimes, nothing happens immediately. The room looks the same. Your phone stays silent. Your bank account looks the same. The people around you still behave the same. And that is the moment your old identity whispers, "See, nothing changed." But something did. You changed the direction. And direction always comes before distance. Think about a ship leaving a harbor. If the captain turns the ship only a few degrees, you may not notice anything at first. For the first few minutes, the ship still looks almost exactly where it was going. But keep moving. And eventually, that tiny change in direction can take the ship to a completely different destination. Your decisions work the same way. One thought may not change your life. One affirmation may not change your circumstances. One brave action may not transform everything overnight. But repeated choices create a direction. And direction creates momentum. This is why you cannot judge your new life by the first few days of the journey. You have to watch the pattern. Are you thinking differently? Are you responding differently? Are you protecting your peace more carefully? Are you walking away from what once controlled you? Are you finally taking yourself seriously? These changes may look small from the outside, but inside, something much larger is happening. You are teaching yourself that the future you imagine is not impossible. And every time you act in alignment with that belief, the old identity loses a little more power. Now imagine that golden door again. You finally open it. But instead of finding a perfect city on the other side, you find another path, a narrow path leading into a strange landscape. There is no applause, no crowd, no instant reward, just a road disappearing into the distance. For a moment, you wonder if you made a mistake. Then you notice something. The farther you walk, the lighter you feel. You are carrying fewer things. Old expectations, old guilt, old fear, old versions of yourself. And suddenly you understand. The door was never promising you an easy life. It was offering you a different life. There is a huge difference. A different life may require different decisions, different boundaries, different habits, different standards, different courage. And sometimes the first evidence that manifestation is working is not that something arrives. It is that something leaves. A relationship that no longer fits. A habit that suddenly feels unbearable. A job you once tolerated. A dream that was never really yours. A version of yourself you can no longer pretend to be. At first, this can feel like loss. But sometimes loss is simply space being created. A closed door can become preparation. An ending can become redirection. A delay can become protection. And uncertainty can become the place where your next identity is built. You do not need to understand every step. You only need to stop assuming that every unexpected event is proof that you have failed. Because your life will not always unfold according to the picture in your head. Sometimes the path will bend. Sometimes the answer will arrive differently than expected. Sometimes what you wanted will not come. Because something more aligned with who you are becoming is waiting beyond it. And this is where surrender becomes powerful. Surrender does not mean giving up. It means releasing the need to control every detail. You choose the direction. Then you allow life to show you the route. You do your part. You take the action. You make the decision. You become available to opportunity. But you stop demanding that the universe follow your exact script. That is freedom. And perhaps this is the real reason manifestation is simple. You were never meant to control everything. You were meant to participate, to choose, to act, to notice, to adjust, to keep moving. Because the moment you stop trying to force every door open, you become able to recognize the doors that are actually opening. And here is the thought I want you to carry with you. Sometimes the manifestation is not the thing you receive. It is the person you become while moving toward it. Let that sink in. Because if that is true, then you are not waiting for your transformation to begin. It has already begun. Every boundary you set, every fear you refuse to obey, every old pattern you finally recognize, every decision you make from self-respect instead of desperation, that is evidence. But there is still one deeper question. If your thoughts, choices, attention, and identity are all shaping the direction of your life. Then what happens when you deliberately train them to move together? What happens when your mind stops pulling one way while your actions pull another? That is where the real practice begins. And that is where most people make their biggest mistake. The old version of you will come back quietly. It may sound like doubt. It may sound like logic. It may sound like caution. It may tell you to wait a little longer, to stay where you are, to avoid the risk, to choose what is familiar. And because that voice has been with you for so long, you may mistake it for truth. But now you know the difference. A thought can appear without becoming a command. Fear can exist without controlling your next move. Doubt can speak without becoming your identity. So when that old voice returns, do not fight it. Just notice it. Take a breath and ask yourself one question. If I were already becoming the person I want to be, what would I choose right now? Not tomorrow. Not someday. Right now? Maybe the answer is small. Maybe it is one conversation, one decision, one boundary, one application, one creative idea, one honest sentence, one step towards something you have been postponing. Do not underestimate small actions. A mountain is not climbed in one movement. It is crossed through thousands of ordinary steps that become extraordinary only when you look back. Your life can change the same way, quietly, gradually. Then suddenly enough that you realize you are no longer standing where you started. And perhaps that is the real mystery behind manifestation. Not that you can magically control every event, but that your repeated attention, choices, beliefs, and actions can move your life in a direction that once seemed impossible. You begin to notice more. You begin to choose differently. You begin to act with greater intention. You begin to recognize opportunities you once overlooked. And the world starts feeling different because you are meeting it differently. That is your shift. Not a perfect life. Not a life without problems. A life where problems no longer automatically convince you to abandon yourself. That is strength. And if you take nothing else from this entire message, remember this. You do not need to become someone completely different overnight. You only need to stop betraying the person you are becoming. Every time you choose courage over avoidance, you reinforce that identity. Every time you choose patience over panic, you reinforce it. Every time you choose self-respect over approval, you reinforce it. Every time you choose action over endless waiting, you reinforce it. And eventually, what once felt like effort begins to feel natural. The old road becomes harder to return to, not because it disappeared, but because you finally understand where it leads. So take one final breath. Look at the life in front of you. Do not demand that it reveal everything. You do not need the entire map. You need the next step. And if you can take that step without needing a guarantee, you are already changing. Because the future does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet decision made when nobody is watching. Sometimes it begins with one sentence. I am ready to move differently. Say it again. I am ready to move differently. Not because you know exactly what will happen, but because you no longer want the same patterns to decide your future. And that is enough to begin. Your life may still have unanswered questions. There may still be delays. There may still be moments when you wonder whether you are moving in the right direction. That is okay. You are not required to know everything. You are required to keep choosing consciously. Keep noticing. Keep acting. Keep adjusting. Keep moving. Because the simplest truth is often the hardest one to accept. You don't create a new life by waiting for a new reality. You create it by becoming willing to live differently before the evidence arrives. So if this message reached you at a moment when something inside you already feels different, pay attention. Not because it proves some supernatural event is about to happen, but because awareness gives you a choice. And choice gives you direction. Direction gives you action. Action creates patterns. And patterns can change a life. That is the part you can control. Not every outcome. Not every person. Not every event. But your next choice. And perhaps that is more powerful than you ever realized. So breathe. Look forward. And take the next step. Your old chapter does not need to disappear before you begin writing the next one. You can begin now. And if you want to carry this idea with you, remember one final line. The shift begins the moment you stop waiting to feel ready and start acting from the future you believe is possible. This is where the journey continues. Not in another perfect affirmation, not in another complicated ritual, but in your next decision, your next action, your next step. And this time, you know exactly where to begin. And when that moment arrives, you may not recognize it at first. It may not look like a breakthrough. It may look like an ending, a rejection, a delay, a sudden change of plans, a door closing when you were certain it was finally going to open. And your first reaction may be, why is this happening to me? But pause. Because sometimes the event you call a setback is actually forcing you to make the decision you were too afraid to make on your own. Think about the desert again. You have been walking toward a distant light for hours. You are tired. You are uncertain. Then suddenly, the light disappears. For a moment, you feel completely lost. You look around and see nothing but empty space. But then you notice something beneath your feet. A path. It was hidden because you were staring at the light. And now that the light is gone, you can finally see the road. That is how life can work. Sometimes what disappears forces you to notice what was already there. A person leaves, and you discover yourself. An opportunity disappears, and another direction becomes visible. A plan fails, and you finally build something that belongs to you. A chapter ends, and suddenly you realize you were never supposed to stay there forever. This does not mean every painful event has some magical purpose. It means you still have the power to choose what the event becomes. That is the part people forget. You cannot control every event, but you can control the meaning you give it, and the action you take next. That is where your power lives. So if something is changing in your life right now, do not immediately assume you are losing. Ask a different question. What is this making possible? That question creates space. It turns a wall into a doorway. It turns an ending into information. It turns uncertainty into movement. And slowly, you begin to understand why manifestation can feel almost invisible. It is not always about making something appear out of nowhere. Sometimes it is about becoming the person who finally notices what was already within reach. The opportunity was there, but you were afraid. The conversation was possible, but your pride kept you silent. The new direction existed, but you were waiting for someone else to approve it. The door was open, but you were still staring at the one that closed. And then one day, something shifts. You stop asking for permission. You stop begging for certainty. You stop chasing proof. You simply decide, I am moving forward. That decision may look small to everyone else, but inside you, it can feel like an entire world has moved. And now you are no longer manifesting from desperation. You are moving from choice. There is a difference between saying, I need this to happen so I can finally be okay, and saying, I am okay enough to move toward what I want. The first one gives your power away. The second one brings it back. That is why your emotional state matters. Not because you must feel positive every second, but because your emotional state influences the decisions you make. When you are desperate, you may chase. When you are afraid, you may settle. When you feel powerless, you may wait. But when you become grounded, you can choose. You can walk away. You can wait when waiting is wise. You can act when action is needed. You can say yes without losing yourself. You can say no without feeling guilty. And suddenly, manifestation becomes less mysterious. It becomes a way of living with intention. You are no longer asking, how do I force reality to give me this? You are asking, how do I become someone who can recognize, receive, and responsibly use the opportunity when it arrives? That question changes everything. Because receiving something is not always the hard part. Keeping it aligned with your values can be harder. Getting success is one thing. Becoming capable of handling success is another. Finding love is one thing. Becoming capable of healthy love is another. Getting freedom is one thing. Knowing what to do with freedom is another. So perhaps your preparation is not a delay. Perhaps the inner work you thought was taking too long is building the capacity for the life you keep asking for. And this is the part nobody wants to hear. Your next chapter may require you to become unfamiliar to your old self. You may have to stop making decisions based on who you used to be. You may have to stop returning to places simply because they are familiar. You may have to let people misunderstand your growth. You may have to walk forward without applause, and that can feel lonely. But loneliness does not always mean you are on the wrong path. Sometimes it simply means you are no longer surrounded by everything that belonged to the previous one. So keep walking. Not because you are guaranteed a perfect ending, but because you have finally decided that your past does not get to make every decision about your future. And remember this: the moment you stop asking the past for permission, the future becomes available. Take that with you, because now you are standing at the final threshold. You understand the desire. You understand the resistance. You understand the choice. You understand the action. But there is one last piece. The piece that determines whether this becomes another inspiring idea you forget tomorrow, or something you actually carry into your life. And that final piece is simple. You have to decide what you will do when the old version of you comes back. Because it will. And when it does, you need to know exactly who you are choosing to become. The mistake is simple. People try to change their thoughts without changing the way they live. They repeat, "I am abundant," while making every decision from fear. They say, "I trust the process," while checking every 5 minutes to see whether the result has arrived. They say, "I am ready for my next chapter," while continuing to behave like the person who was afraid to begin. And then they wonder why nothing feels different. But your mind is not listening only to your words. It is watching what you repeatedly do. That is why the real practice is not complicated. You do not need to spend hours sitting in silence. You do not need a perfect room. You do not need a special time of day. You need a moment of honesty. Sit quietly for a moment. Take a slow breath. And ask yourself, what am I actually expecting? Not what do you want? Not what sounds positive. What do you genuinely expect? Because there can be a huge difference between desire and expectation. You may desire success, but expect rejection. You may desire love, but expect abandonment. You may desire freedom, but expect failure. You may desire abundance, but expect everything to disappear. And those hidden expectations can quietly control your choices. So begin there. Do not attack them. Do not judge yourself. Just notice them, because awareness creates space. And inside that space, you get to choose something different. Imagine that you are standing in the center of a dark room. For years, you believed there was only one door. The door you came through. The door connected to your past. The door connected to everything you already knew. But when you become quiet enough, you notice another door. It was always there. You simply could not see it because you were staring at the old one. It reveals possibilities that fear keeps hidden. And once you see the possibility, you have another choice. You can return to the old pattern, or you can take one small step toward the new one. One step. Not 20. Not a complete transformation overnight. One. Maybe today that step is making a decision you have been avoiding. Maybe it is starting something you keep postponing. Maybe it is finally giving yourself permission to want something bigger. Maybe it is walking away from a situation that constantly makes you smaller. The action itself may look ordinary, but the meaning behind it is powerful. You are telling yourself, "I no longer need to remain the person I used to be." And every time you repeat that through action, your identity becomes stronger. This is where manifestation stops being fantasy and becomes practice. You think. You choose. You act. You observe. You adjust. Then you repeat. That is the rhythm. And there will be days when you fall back into old habits. Do not panic. One fearful day does not erase your progress. One negative thought does not destroy your future. One mistake does not cancel your new identity. You are not trying to become perfect. You are becoming consistent. There is a difference. Consistency means that even when the old version of you appears, you do not automatically obey it. You notice the fear. You breathe. You pause. Then you choose again. And again. And again. Until the new response becomes more natural than the old one. This is how the threshold becomes a path. And this is also why you should stop chasing constant signs. If you need a sign every hour to believe you are moving forward, you are giving the sign more power than your own decision. Look at your life instead. Look at your patterns. Look at your choices. Look at what you no longer tolerate. Look at what you are finally willing to pursue. Those changes matter. Because the strongest evidence that you are becoming different is not always something appearing outside you. Sometimes it is something disappearing inside you. The need to prove yourself. The need to chase everyone. The need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. The fear of saying no. The belief that you have to stay small to stay safe. One by one, those things begin losing their grip. And suddenly, you realize something. You were not trying to create a new reality. You were trying to become available to one. That is a completely different way of seeing manifestation. You stop asking life to give you permission. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop treating uncertainty as a warning. You start treating it as open space. And open space can become anything. So tonight, or whenever you hear this message again, try something simple. Close your eyes. Take one slow breath. Picture the version of your life you genuinely want. Do not focus only on what you would own. Focus on how you would move. How would you speak? What would you stop tolerating? What would you finally begin? What would no longer frighten you? Then choose one action that matches that version of you. Just one. Because that action is the bridge. And here is the line worth remembering. You do not manifest by wishing harder. You manifest by living in the direction of what you say you believe. Now something interesting happens. Once you begin doing this consistently, you start noticing patterns. A conversation arrives at the right moment. An opportunity appears. An old situation returns to test whether you have really changed. And sometimes, something happens that looks completely random, but it forces you to make a decision. And that decision may become the moment everything begins moving faster than you expected.